Imagine the dread of waking up in the middle of the night, in biting cold, knowing something is watching you. Now multiply that by 9. 9 people, young, strong, experienced, who tore their own tent from the inside, fleeing into the inescapable darkness of a Russian mountain, without boots, without coats, running toward certain death. Man, what could cause such profound, absolute terror that their survival instinct turned into a death sentence? Was it a ghost, a secret weapon, or something much closer to us, something that resides in our own minds?
Welcome to the Cube of Mysteries, where we unravel the dread that history hides. The Dyatlov Pass incident of 1959 is the epitome of a mystery that consumes us. It's not just about 9 students who died, but about the terror of not knowing if it's real, if your mind is betraying you, or if the haunting pursuing you is made of flesh, bone, or just freezing air. That's the pain, the frustration of incomplete answers, the fear of losing control. We're talking about Igor Dyatlov and his team, experienced skiers with their whole lives ahead of them, facing Koletzakal Mountain, ironically already called the Dead Mountain by the native Mansi people. What happened there wasn't a weather accident, man. It was a silent scream of despair so brutal that 60 years later, it still echoes. Our journey today doesn't seek the easy answer. We seek the dread their minds felt. The only solution to this mystery is to dive into the horror, feel that adrenaline rush of fear, and challenge what the Soviet Union tried to bury under layers of bureaucracy and ice. They closed the case saying a compelling natural force caused the deaths. Natural force? If it wasn't a monster, then what mutilated those young people? A cat with an existential crisis in the middle of Siberia? Stick around, because the terrifying revelation lies in the subtext of the official story. Stay until the end for the terrifying revelations about what science says might have torn apart the minds of these mountaineers. I guarantee it'll mess with your head and test your courage. Before we dive into the inescapable darkness of the mountain, you know the drill. Subscribe to the Cube of Mysteries and hit the bell so you don't miss another dose of the dread we love so much. In January 1959, these 9 young people were the face of Soviet hope. Students, adventurers, the embodiment of the ordinary life you or I know. They weren't movie heroes, but people like us, with their diaries, inside jokes, and plans for the future. And it was that humanity that made what happened on Dead Mountain, Koletzakal, so terrifying. The leader, Igor Dyatlov, a methodical, experienced guy, wasn't one to make silly mistakes. The beauty of the place was oppressive, the snow a pristine white sheet, but man, have you ever felt a chill you can't explain, as if the beauty hit a haunting? They set up camp on the slope, an oddly exposed spot. The dread wasn't in the weather, it was in the choice of location. Why would such an experienced group do that? That tent, the one they'd tear apart hours later, was their last line of defense against the cold, their temporary home against the inescapable darkness of the Siberian taiga. Think about it. They were safe, laughing, eating. To feel that terror, turn off your room's lights now and imagine the mountain, silencing everything around you except the crunch of snow. What could shatter that sense of safety so suddenly? The diaries and photos we found show the transition, From joyful images of camaraderie, we jump to a documentary silence. The last photo shows the tent set up, a warm light inside, a final refuge. It's the calm before the storm, where life is still in control. But that control is an illusion. I felt that dread once, like something was moving in the corner of my vision, in the inescapable darkness of an old attic. And what comes next, what made them abandon that light, is the part that truly shrinks us with fear and spikes the adrenaline of terror.
When the rescue team arrived, what they found wasn't an abandoned camp, but a scene of pure dread. The tent was torn, not at the door, but slashed from the inside out. Think about it. They had an easy exit, but whatever was outside was less terrifying than what was inside. It's like in The Shining, where the hotel becomes the prison and evil creeps through the walls. They fled from safety, throwing themselves into the blizzard barefoot in pajamas or socks. The silent scream wasn't in the wind, it was in the desperate decision to trade hypothermia for immediate death, as if they'd been driven out by a haunting faster than fire. The first two bodies were found a mile and a half from the tent near a pathetic, barely lit fire. They were Yuri Krivonisenko and Yuri Doroshenko, almost naked. One had bruised hands, as if he'd tried to climb a tree to escape something coming from the ground. That's not the behavior of someone confused by the cold. It's absolute terror. It's the dread of something invisible, an inescapable darkness that doesn't let you think. They didn't wander off. They fled in a straight line, away from their only refuge. What was so terrifying that it made even the most experienced of them forget their mountaineering lessons? This is the first terrifying revelation. The force that attacked them wasn't the cold was the consequence. The psychological terror here is the idea that your mind can turn against you suddenly, without warning. I'm reminded of cases like Amityville, where the house doesn't kill you with knives, but destroys your sanity. These young people were being chased by something only they could see or feel, something that drained all their rationality, leaving only the adrenaline of fear. They weren't dying. They were fleeing from something that would only become clearer with the discoveries that followed.
What the search revealed in the following months only deepened the dread. The last 4 bodies were found deeper in the valley, and they were the terrifying revelation that it wasn't just the cold. Ludmila Dubinina had her tongue and eyes torn out. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had his skull crushed. 2 others had fractured ribs. But the most chilling detail, something straight out of a Stephen King book, is that there were no signs of external struggle or bruising. It was as if they'd been crushed by an invisible internal force, or thrown from an absurd height. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't the natives, it was the silent scream of a pressure only the mountain or psychological terror could impose. Beyond the mutilations, the final touch of the mystery. Traces of radiation on some victims' clothes. Radiation? This immediately sparked theories of secret military experiments, a Russian weapon gone wrong, creating a technological haunting in the middle of the ice. It reminds you of cases like the blonde in the bathroom, blending everyday fear, the school bathroom, with something inexplicable, the spirit. But here the inexplicable had an atomic signature. The fear of losing control and the fear of technology merge, making the inescapable darkness even denser. What's most frightening isn't the death itself, but how it arrived. People dying of fear? With broken bones without being touched? Missing organs? Soviet investigators tried to wrap it up, but the conclusion of an unknown force was, in truth, an admission that terror had defeated logic. The dread is feeling the adrenaline of fear coursing through your veins, knowing you're being crushed by something you can't see. But what if the monster didn't come from a secret lab, but from nature itself? That brings us to the final dread, the theory that truly taps into our fear of losing sanity.
The most chilling theory, one Stephen King would love, is that the invisible killer was infrasound. What's that, man? It's sound, but at a frequency so low you don't hear it. You feel it. Think of the katabatic winds of the mountain. They might have created an aerodynamic phenomenon that generated infrasound waves, and when that frequency hits the human ear, it doesn't just cause nausea and pain,
but at specific intensities triggers extreme dread and anxiety. The silent scream wasn't coming from a haunting in the valley, but from the air itself. Infrasound might have invaded the mountaineers' brains, causing a wave of irrational panic, the feeling that something indescribable and monstrous was about to attack them inside the tent. It's psychological terror in its purest form, the fear that your own body is betraying you. They tore their shelter apart, not because the monster was there, but because the monster was in their heads, screaming for them to flee into the inescapable darkness. That adrenaline of fear drove them to commit suicide by cold, fleeing a threat that only existed in their nervous systems. This is the lesson Dyatlov leaves us. Sometimes the greatest dread isn't the monster out there, but the fragility of our own minds. Want to feel that terror in practice? Record sounds in an isolated place at night, and then listen. Notice how your brain desperately tries to create shapes and hauntings in the random noises. Dyatlov and his team weren't victims of a conspiracy or a yeti. They were victims of their own panic, amplified by nature. That's why the case remains open, because the truth is scarier than the legend.
So, what's your favorite terrifying revelation? Was it the infrasound that turned the air itself into a dread engine? Or do you still bet that a KGB haunting or a Siberian yeti hunted them to death? Comment below your theory on Dyatlov's silent scream. Your opinion is what drives the Cube of Mysteries. Leave a like if you felt the adrenaline of fear run down your spine, and hit the bell to not miss the next terror that'll chill your soul. But hold on, if you thought an invisible force crushing you in the ice was the peak of terror, you haven't seen anything yet. In the next video, we're heading to a place where the dread didn't come from the air or the snow. It came from something crawling inside an ordinary home, turning a family into victims of a haunting that refuses to be ignored. A silent scream from a house that doesn't want to be abandoned. Get ready for a psychological terror even deeper that'll test your courage in the inescapable darkness of four walls.